Hi everyone! This is my first video. Please let me know where I can improve and share your thoughts. I'd really appreciate your feedback. Thank you for watching. Word that the Demon King had issued no new commands of war reached Grog the Orc, once the feared commander of the demon army, now working for peace. No troop surge. No retaliatory strike. Grog absorbed the news in silence, suspicion tightening his jaw even as a cautious trace of hope refused to leave. Silence from the Demon King was never simple, and Grog knew it better than most. Later, the trio of peace, Ilara the elf, her disciple human assassin boy Catio, and Grog, gathered at a small crossroads shrine under pale moonlight. Stone markers stood worn and uneven, offerings left untouched. The city's noise felt distant here, replaced by stillness and the faint rustle of the night air. Ilara broke the silence. She spoke carefully, choosing each word. If the Demon King was holding back, she said, it might mean something had shifted. Not peace, but perhaps a moment where dialogue was still possible. Kaito did not answer immediately. He watched the road, listening to the quiet. Then he nodded once. The opening, he said, was small, but real. And small openings closed quickly if ignored. Grog turned his gaze toward the distant lands where demon territory began. The weight of past commands, battles, and broken loyalties showed plainly on his face. When he spoke, it was with resolve rather than certainty. If there was a chance to stop what was coming, he would walk toward it. Before dawn they set out. The road ahead vanished into darkness beneath a starless sky. With no banners marked their path and no escort followed, only the steady sound of footsteps moving toward uncertain ground. Suddenly ambush came on their path. Figures surged from the roadside as steel flashed in the dark. The narrow road erupted into violence, strikes landing fast and close before words could be spoken. These mercenaries moved with practiced coordination. They covered one another, pressed angles, and advanced with disciplined precision. This was certainly not a desperate band. It was a well-funded operation, executed cleanly and without hesitation. Kaito dropped one attacker hard and stripped the weapon away. He paused just long enough to inspect the gear, unmarked, expertly made, and far better than common hirelings could afford. He pocketed the knowledge and moved on. As the clash spilled outward, Ilara spotted civilians frozen at the edge of the road. She stepped between them and the fighting, raising her staff to shield the civilian bypassers. Her magic shifted carefully, turning force aside and guiding danger away without striking back. Grog drove the last of the attackers back with heavy, controlled strikes. Armor clashed, bodies stumbled, and the road briefly filled with the sound of retreating boots. But as the mercenaries pulled away, he noticed the pattern. No wild flight, no broken formation. They withdrew in pairs, covering each other as they vanished into the dark. The absence of panic unsettled him more than resistance would have. One wounded mercenary lay gasping near the roadside. When Kaito moved to restrain him, the man's eyes flicked once, decisive. He bit down hard. A sharp crack followed, then silence. Whatever had been hidden in his mouth worked quickly, leaving no chance for answers. The road fell quiet. The trio stood among fallen bodies and scattered weapons, the air still carrying the scent of steel and dust. No banners marked the dead. No insignia claimed them. The lack of identity spoke louder than any symbol. Kaito wiped his blade and spoke softly. This hadn't been strike from any faction, he said. Neither human nor demon command would waste assets like this. Someone else wanted them removed, and wanted it clean. Ilara knelt and gathered what the attackers had left behind. Seals pressed into documents. Trademarks burned into metal fittings. Merchant guild symbols. Subtle, but consistent. She laid the evidence out plainly. This was funded violence, hidden behind merchant guild, no direct evidence. Ahead of them, the demon border towers rose from the land like dark sentinels. Their stonework was massive, weathered, and deliberate. Even from a distance, their presence pressed down on the road, marking a line few crossed willingly. Grog slowed as they reached the border. He stopped just short of the line, eyes fixed on the ground ahead. Old commands, old banners, and old blood weighed heavily in his posture as the past crowded into the present. After a moment, he stepped forward. The borderline passed beneath his boots without ceremony. No words were spoken, but the choice was clear and final. The response was immediate. Demon patrols emerged from shadow and cover, weapons raised and voices sharp with command. The trio was surrounded in seconds, steel forming a tightening ring around them. Grog reached back, lifted his axe, and placed it on the ground between them. The metal struck stone with a dull sound. He straightened slowly as the demon soldiers closed in, unarmed, unbowed, and waiting to be captured. That is the only way to meet the Demon King without offending him, in order to hold peace talks. Several weeks before, the three adventurers stood before the gaping maw of the dragon's cavern, shadows stretching long behind them. Grog, the towering orc tank with green skin and a battle-worn topknot, braced his massive tower shield against the earth. Yellow eyes burned beneath the iron plates of his armor, reflecting the danger ahead. Beside him, Ilara's white robes fluttered gently in the cave's breath, their gold trim catching faint light. Her long blonde hair cascaded around pointed elven ears, emerald eyes focused as she gripped her glowing golden staff. Kaito lingered just behind them, half wrapped in the tattered crimson scarf that trailed from his neck. His messy black hair and cold steel-gray eyes contrasted sharply against the black leather armor fitted tightly to his frame. Twin daggers shimmered at his sides, eager for motion. Together, they faced the darkness, three silhouettes united by purpose and danger. Grog stepped forward and slammed his shield into the ground, the metallic echo rolling through the cavern. "Ready yourselves," he rumbled, steady and unshaken. A tremor stirred the depths. Two burning eyes ignited in the darkness, glowing with predatory fury as the dragon emerged from the shadows. Blue fire burst toward them. Grog braced, shield raised as the torrent hammered against it, sparks and azure flames exploding around him. Kaito launched himself upward, vaulting over Grog's shoulder with fluid precision, daggers flashing as motion blurred behind him. Behind them, Ilara whispered her incantation. Golden light curled around her hands, weaving itself into shape with every word she uttered. Kaito descended in a swift arc, carving a clean slash across the dragon's leg. A spray of hot blood marked his strike. The dragon retaliated instantly, claws sweeping with lethal force, yet Kaito twisted mid-air, narrowly slipping past the strike. "Over here, lizard!" Grog roared, slamming his shield again to drag the dragon's murderous attention back to him. Ilara raised her staff, releasing a warm beam of healing light. It swept over Grog's armor, knitting dents and scorches back into gleaming steel. With perfect timing, Kaito surged up the dragon's side and struck deep into its eye, landing a critical, blinding blow. The dragon's roar shook the cavern, shockwaves pulsing outward in violent ripples that rattled stone and bone alike. Seeing his chance, Grog charged, battle aura flaring around him as he lifted his axe for the final strike. The world flashed white as his blow connected, a stark, explosive impact that cut through the chaos. The dragon collapsed in a thunderous fall. As golden light spilled across the mountainside, the three heroes stood together, panting but victorious. The dragon's massive body lay still at the mouth of the cavern, smoke curling gently from the wounds that still glowed faintly with dying heat. Grog braced himself on his shield, breath heavy but steady. Ilara knelt nearby, gathering her strength, while Kaito stood apart, daggers lowered, watching the fading embers drift through the golden hour light. A crack split across the dragon's blackened scales. They peeled back with a brittle scrape, revealing a crystalline core nestled deep within its chest. It turned slowly, pulsing with a cool blue life that shimmered into the air as glittering particles. Kaito leaned in, the core's glow reflected in his narrowed eyes. His daggers hung loose at his sides, forgotten for the moment as the shifting blue light washed over his expression, unreadable and sharp. Ilara rose, though her legs trembled beneath her. Lifting her staff, she summoned warm golden runes that spiraled along its polished surface. Their light met the blue of the core, gold and azure intertwining in a quiet clash of magic. Grog's grip tightened around his axe handle, muscles tensing beneath scarred green skin. Dungeon-dark shadows crept along his arms, tracing every old wound as if the past itself stirred at the sight of the exposed core. Gradually, the dragon's core dimmed. Its rotation slowed to a gentle halt, and an unnatural hush fell over the cave. Dust drifted lazily from the ceiling as the wind outside stilled, the warm evening light dampened by the sudden quiet. For the briefest moment, a symbol flared beneath Kaito's scarf, quick as a heartbeat, faint as an afterimage of light on water, and vanished before anyone could truly see it. But Ilara noticed enough. Her eyes sharpened as concern cracked through her collected calm. She turned toward Kaito, lips parting with a question that never fully formed. Kaito shifted away from her gaze, tugging his scarf higher to hide whatever she might have glimpsed. Embers drifted past him, fading into cool shadows that clung to the cavern walls. Grog stepped forward, planting his feet with deliberate weight. With a single decisive motion, he brought his axe down beside the dragon's corpse. The impact split the stone in a sharp, ringing crack that echoed through the stillness. At the edge of the cavern entrance, a lone figure halted mid-step. Lorn, ash-brown hair tousled by mountain wind, hazel eyes wide with disbelief, froze as he beheld the fallen dragon and the warriors who had slain it. His brown travel coat fluttered around him, marked with the subtle stains of ink and charcoal. Clutched in trembling fingers was his worn sketchboard, edges smudged from countless hurried drawings. The fading embers drifting past illuminated ink-stained hands, proof he was a recorder of stories, not a fighter. In that moment, he looked as though he had stumbled into a legend. His hands trembled around a small charcoal sketchboard. Even in shock, rough lines had already begun sketching the outline of the fallen dragon. Embers drifted around him, catching lightly on the page. From Lorn's vantage, Grog's massive frame turned slightly. The orc's armor glinted in the light, his shadow stretching long across the cave floor, broad, imposing, unmistakably powerful. Ilara lifted herself fully upright, planting her staff with quiet confidence. Her posture was calm but guarded, eyes steady as she met the stranger's gaze. Kaito stood half-turned, cloak stirring in the cave's fading breeze. His expression lay hidden beneath the shadow of his scarf, unreadable, as always. The stranger, Lorn, stepped fully into the light and dropped to one knee without thinking. Behind the trio, the dragon's skull loomed, the scene composed like the final image of an epic tale. He looked up at them with wide eyes, equal parts terror and awe. Charcoal smudged across his cheek, he struggled to speak, voice caught somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. Grog exhaled in a long, weary breath. He rolled one shoulder, battle aura fading from around him like the last remnants of heat after a forge cools. From behind Ilara, Lorn gestured shakily toward the open mountainside. Far below, rooftops of a distant town peeked between the trees. His movements were apologetic, uncertain. A sudden whir of wings broke the tension. A flock of messenger birds burst from the treetops, startled into the warm sky, their silhouettes scattering across the horizon. Kaito's gaze flicked upward, tracking the birds as they vanished into the light. His eyes narrowed, calculating implications no one else yet saw. Ilara's grip on her staff eased. A quiet sigh escaped her, resignation softening her glowing features as though she already understood the trouble that would surely follow. Shouldering his axe, Grog turned toward the mountain trail. Long shadows stretched at his feet, the warm rim of sunlight outlining the broad lines of his frame. Together, the trio began their descent. The dragon's corpse faded behind them, swallowed by stone and trees as the last rays of golden light filtered through the forest. From far below, the mountain towered like an immovable titan. The three heroes appeared as small, fleeting shapes moving against its vastness, already shrinking into silhouettes, already becoming rumor as dusk settled. As the trio descended from the mountain path, the outskirts of a bustling town opened before them. Sunset washed over tiled roofs and rising chimney smoke, bathing the settlement in the last warm breath of golden light. Town guards stiffened the moment they saw approaching silhouettes. Hands drifted instinctively toward spear shafts, while nearby townsfolk slowed their steps, whispering behind raised hands. One guard's eyes widened as he caught sight of the enormous dragon horn strapped to Grog's back. Torchlight cast sharp shadows across his startled expression. The town gate erupted into motion. Guards shouted, scrambling into formation. People stepped back hurriedly. Children peered from doorways, wide-eyed. Torchlight flickered wildly, throwing chaotic shadows across stone walls. Ilara lifted her hand in a calming gesture, her staff grounded beside her. A gentle glow surrounded her, easing the tension even as confusion rippled through the crowd. From a guard's vantage, Grog lowered his axe and dipped his massive frame slightly, a rare gesture meant to soften his intimidating presence in the torch-lit dusk. Kaito's gaze swept the gathering crowd. Every movement, every whisper, every potential exit flickered through his mind like shifting pieces on a board. Murmurs spread quickly among the townsfolk. Some pointed at the dragon horn, others whispered a single word, "Slayers," as though the term itself carried both awe and danger. Lorne pushed past the guards, breathless, thrusting his sketchboard toward the gate captain. Whatever words he had caught in his lungs were replaced by the rough charcoal drawing on the page. The gate captain studied the crude dragon sketch, his jaw tightening. Harsh torchlight carved deep shadows across his face as realization set in. Inside the guild hall, lanterns flared brightly. Officials hurried to clear tables, unfurl contracts, and prepare the room with the organized urgency reserved for rare, high-stakes moments. At the head of the bustling guild hall stood Marek Vane, immovable as stone. His steel-gray hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a sharp countenance carved by battle and responsibility. A jagged scar crossed his left eyebrow, giving weight to the cold authority in his gaze. He wore the dark red coat of a guild master, reinforced to the shoulders, embroidered with rank, and illuminated sharply by the lantern light around him. Arms crossed, posture unwavering, he commanded the room without uttering a single word. In the frantic stir of the hall, Marek Vane was the still point of control. Grog placed the dragon horn and a sealed container holding the core onto the table. The thud resonated through the hall, drawing every gaze. Marek's eyes flickered briefly toward the core container, just long enough to reveal interest, before returning to the trio, expression controlled and unreadable. The three heroes stood before the assembled officials. Lanterns ringed them, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished floor like dark echoes of the battle they had left behind. Marek stepped forward, lantern light glinting off the dark red fabric of his guild coat. He raised one hand, and the hall fell into expectant silence. A guild scribe opened a thick ledger, its parchment pale under the lantern glow. The quill hovered above the first blank line, ink glistening like a promise. Marek gestured toward the dragon horn resting at the center of the table. From the official's perspective, it was the proof of a feat rarely witnessed, and even more rarely survived. For documentation, Grog speaks first, stating his name with calm authority. Ilara follows, her name delivered evenly and without hesitation. Kaito answers last, his name spoken low, brief, and deliberate. Elsewhere, far from the bustle of the guild hall, a letter was sealed with molten wax bearing a guild emblem. Smoke rose from the stamp as the wax cooled, its message already set in motion. Morning light spread over the town as guild banners fluttered in the breeze. The streets buzzed with motion and rumor, the story of the dragon's fall moving faster than the sun itself. Children raced through the streets, waving crude wooden dragon horns, and shouting triumphantly. Nearby, adults traded ever-growing versions of the tale, each retelling louder and more embellished than the last. Grog, Ilara, and Kaito moved through the crowd in full gear. Conversations faltered as they passed. Eyes followed them with a mix of awe, fear, and unspoken questions. Inside a tavern, a merchant slammed a stack of coins onto the table, voice raised in frustration. He argued that a dragon shifting territory would ruin long-established trade routes. Another merchant leaned over a rough map, tracing altered paths with a tense finger. Candlelight flickered across cluttered ledgers as new routes, and new risks, were debated. At the town gate, a small group of monks arrived, packs light and healer satchels worn smooth with use. Their leader walked calmly at the front, untouched by the surrounding tension. The monk bowed gently to a guard and spoke with quiet clarity. His order, he explained, had come to heal all those injured by the dragon's rampage, without regard for race or allegiance. From across the street, Ilara noticed the monks. Recognition softened her expression, a faint warmth returning to her eyes at the sight of their familiar robes. Ilara met the monk leader in the open street. They exchanged respectful nods while Grog and Kaito remained a step behind, listening in silence. The monk leader, Tenzu, bowed slightly, orange robes and prayer beads marking him as a healer of the wandering orders. Resting both hands on his staff, he spoke with calm certainty. "Dragons," he said, "do not abandon their territory unless something far greater disturbs them." Inside the guild hall, Marek Vane, the guild master, stood with scribes and aides around a broad map table. Lantern light revealed shifting borders and hastily placed markers as strategy replaced celebration. Marek circled the black ridge with a deliberate stroke, drawing lines toward trade routes and borderlands. His silence spoke of preparation, far from relief. In a dim study far from the town, Ran, a human minister, read a sealed guild report by candlelight. His black hair was neatly combed, dark blue coat trimmed with gold catching the flame. Gray eyes rested on the words Black Ridge Dragon Slain. Ren tapped the parchment once, thoughtfully. As a minister, he weighed more than facts. He weighed outcomes, influence, and the story's power preferred to tell. A wall map in front of him displayed human territories, demon borders, and fragile trade lines. Ren placed a new marker where the dragon had fallen, already reshaping policy in his mind. In the depths of a demon throne room, Varen, the demon king, sat upon a raised seat of obsidian and flame. Dark regal armor framed his form, crown-horn bands encircling his head as a messenger knelt before him. At the mention of the orc named Grog, Varen's hand tightened around the ring hanging from a chain at his neck. Amber eyes burned quietly in the firelight. Standing beside the throne was Korvok, a demon general. Jagged red hair and crimson eyes matched the spiked black armor he wore, his massive halberd resting as if it weighed nothing at all. Varen leaned forward, voice low and measured, asking whether the humans boasted openly of slaying one of his threats. Korvok answered with a faint smile. War, he said, rarely needed a reason, only a nudge. Heroes made convenient targets, and even better excuses. Ren unfolded another guild report beneath the steady glow of candlelight. His eyes paused when he reached a familiar name, Grog, listed among the confirmed dragon slayers. He did not react, but he did not turn the page either. Ren reached for a pen and wrote a short note in precise strokes. Potential piece. Watch. Do not touch yet. He set the paper aside, separate from the report, as if it belonged to a different future. In a demon war chamber, Korvok struck his halberd against a heavy table. The sound rang through stone as a marker was placed near the border regions. One more symbol added to a growing pattern of movement and conflict. Far from the open halls of power, a human broker and a demon agent met in a smoke-filled backroom. Their conversation stayed low and brief. One conclusion was shared between them. A living Grog disrupted too many plans. 2 bounty contracts were finalized separately. A human seal pressed into wax on one. A demon mark burned into the other. Both promised the same reward, for Grog, captured, or dead. At a quiet crossroads hamlet, a bounty poster was nailed into a wooden board. The hammer strikes echoed once, then faded, leaving Grog's likeness staring out at the passing road. Travelers slowed as they read the notice. Beneath the reward amount, 2 symbols stood together, one human, one demon, making the message unmistakable. At the edge of town, Tenzu handed the trio a sealed scroll and a monk's emblem. "Show this if you're questioned," he said. Ilara accepted it carefully and inclined her head. Kaito watched the road without turning. Tenzu held their gaze a moment longer. "Crossroad City won't be safe," he said. "But it will be honest." He stepped back, already knowing they would go. The 3 left the town behind and followed the winding road into open land. The mountains receded at their backs. Ahead, the road stretched forward, quiet now, but no longer unnoticed. Crossroad City soon filled the horizon ahead. Buildings crowded together in uneven layers, their styles clashing openly. Stone beside wood, old towers beside newer walls. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, blurring into the low gray clouds above and giving the city a constant, restless breath. Inside the streets, movement pressed in from every direction. Humans argued with demons at market stalls. Elves haggled beside orcs over crates of goods. Voices rose, deals were struck, and disputes ended only when something else demanded attention. The city functioned, but never calmly. As they moved with the crowd, Grog reached up and pulled his hood lower. The fabric hid his tusks and shadowed his eyes, but his broad frame still forced people to shift aside as he passed. A child stopped and pointed at him without hesitation, staring at the armor and sheer size. A parent reacted instantly, gripping the child's arm and pulling them back, whispering sharply as they disappeared into the press of bodies. Ilara slowed near a small roadside shrine set into a stone alcove. Fresh offerings rested at its base. She bowed her head briefly, standing still amid the flow of the street, then straightened and rejoined the others without a word. Kaito paused near a crowded notice board nailed to a wooden post. Layers of parchment overlapped, local requests, bounty notices, warnings, fragments of war news, edges torn and curling, some crossed out, others newly pinned. One sheet held his attention. A rough dragon sketch filled the page, its shape unmistakable. Beneath it, 3 shadowed figures were drawn standing together, their forms vague but familiar enough to make him linger. From inside a nearby tavern, raised voices spilled into the street. Mercenaries argued loudly, tankards clashing against the table as they debated whether the dragon slayers brought order, or whether trouble followed them like a shadow. Inside that same tavern, Grog, Ilara, and Kaito sat at a small table near the wall. Cloaks stayed on despite the warmth. Around them, laughter and shouting continued, but their own voices stayed low as they spoke about how quickly attention had found them. Ilara's gaze dropped to the table as she spoke. "We wanted to stop a war," she said quietly. She looked up again, meeting their eyes. "Not become everyone's story." The noise of the tavern faded as memory took hold. Years earlier, Ilara walked along a narrow dirt road beside a small group of monks escorting refugees. The air was dry and dusty, footsteps uneven as weary travelers moved forward in a long, fragile line. Kaito, younger and less armored then, stayed close to the edge of the group. He moved quietly, eyes lifting again and again toward the tree line. Every rustle of leaves, every break in the wind, drew his attention as he paced their slow progress. Ilara knelt beside a child who had stumbled on the road. She brushed dirt from the scraped knee and placed her hand gently over the wound. Warmth spread beneath her touch, the skin knitting together as the child watched in silent relief. The monks nearby paused, observing with quiet gratitude. Far ahead, a thin line of smoke rose above a distant hill. It darkened as it climbed, unmistakable against the pale sky. The refugees slowed, unease rippling through the group as eyes turned toward the horizon. Ilara straightened and spoke to the monks in a low, firm voice. They were to hold the refugees back and keep them together. She and Kaito would go ahead. There was no debate, only swift agreement before she and Kaito moved forward. Beyond the rise, the source of the smoke became clear. Grog stood in the open, wounded and alone, his armor cracked and darkened. Human and demon soldiers surrounded him in a loose circle, weapons drawn, tension sharp enough to feel in the air between them. Shouts overlapped as both sides hurled accusations. Some called Grog a spy for the demons. Others named him a traitor to demons. Grog said nothing. He remained still, eyes cold and steady, refusing to answer either claim. Ilara stepped forward into the space between the two factions. She raised her staff and shouted, "Enough!" Light flared outward in a sudden burst, bright enough to force hesitation and break the moment before the first strike. As the light drew their focus, Kaito moved. He slipped through the crowded soldiers, kicking weapons from hands, striking joints and wrists with quick, controlled movements. Steel clattered to the ground as balance and momentum were stolen without bloodshed. Confusion spread quickly. Outmatched and uncertain, both groups fell back, then withdrew entirely. When the dust settled, Grog, Ilara, and Kaito stood alone in a rough triangle, abandoned weapons scattered across the ground around them. Grog watched the last of the soldiers retreat into the distance. Dust hung in the air where they had stood moments before. Slowly, he turned toward Ilara and Kaito. His expression was guarded, suspicion clear, but beneath it sat something heavier, recognition earned through survival. Ilara met his gaze without stepping back. Her staff rested at her side as she spoke evenly. "Walk with us," she said, "or die here when they come back." There was no emotion in her voice, only certainty. Kaito stood just behind her, daggers now sheathed. His attention never left the tree line, eyes scanning for movement as if expecting the fight to resume at any moment. The three turned away from the abandoned field together. Bodies, broken weapons, and fallen banners were left behind as they followed the road onward, their steps unspoken agreement enough. The memory loosened its grip, and the tavern returned around them. Grog, Ilara, and Kaito sat in the same loose triangular formation, but time had changed them. Shoulders carried more weight now, silence thicker than before. Kaido's eyes drifted to Grog's armor, its plates repaired and reinforced. He remembered how torn and broken it had been that first day, how close it had come to failing entirely. Grog stared into his drink, fingers wrapped tightly around the cup. His jaw set as old commands surfaced, orders once followed as Demon General without hesitation, without question. Ilara watched them both from across the table. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered, measuring the distance between who they had been and who they were still becoming. Outside the tavern, night settled fully over Crossroad City. Torches flared as fresh wanted posters bearing Grog's face were nailed to wooden boards, the sound of hammer strikes echoing down narrow streets. From a nearby alley, a cloaked figure stepped forward, tore one poster free, and rolled it tightly under an arm. Without looking back, the figure vanished into the moving crowd. The three stood atop the remains of a broken watchtower overlooking the outskirts of Crossroad City. Below them, makeshift refugee camps spread across uneven ground, canvas shelters flapping faintly in the wind. Patrol routes cut through the area like scars, walked again and again beneath an overcast sky that held neither storm nor relief. Grog's gaze fixed on a gathering below where voices rose sharply. A human refugee shouted back at a demon, anger spilling faster than sense. Grog's fists tightened at his sides, muscles tensing beneath his armor, but he stayed where he was, breathing slow, holding himself still. Ilara followed the exchange with her eyes, watching how the crowd shifted around the argument. After a brief pause, she stepped forward, staff planted firmly against the stone beneath her feet. The faintest glow gathered around her, steady and controlled. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying without force. She addressed both sides, calling out individual fears and shared exhaustion, placing herself between them. Gradually, the shouting faltered. Nearby, a mercenary pushed through the thinning crowd, hand dropping toward a hidden blade. Kaido was already moving. In a single smooth motion, disarm him with a punch, just enough to end the thought of violence before it began. No one was hurt. Few even noticed how quickly it ended. The tension eased in small steps. Voices lowered. People backed away. Monks moved in among the crowd, kneeling beside the injured and opening healer satchels. The space that had threatened to erupt instead settled into cautious quiet. As the crowd dispersed, refugees glanced back toward the trio. Some bowed their heads. Others offered brief nods. Gratitude showed unevenly, mixed with uncertainty, and the knowledge that safety here was temporary at best. From a nearby rooftop, a cloaked figure watched the scene unfold. The observer remained still as the trio intervened below, attention fixed on how quickly violence had been stopped, and by whom. The figure lowered a spyglass and turned slightly away from the edge. A small notebook appeared in hand, and quick marks were scratched onto the page, the details recorded without expression. Later that day, a notice board along a busy street was updated. Fresh writing stood out among the cluttered postings. Neutral protectors active at crossroads. Pedestrians slowed as they read, the words spreading quietly through the city. Grog stood before the notice board, eyes fixed on the freshly written words. His jaw tightened as he read them again. The name, the role, the attention, it all sat wrong with him. He exhaled slowly through his nose, shoulders set beneath the dull afternoon light. Ilara stepped closer and placed a hand lightly against his arm. She didn't speak. The pressure was brief, steady, and deliberate, enough to draw his focus back without calling attention to itself. Across the street, Kaido's attention shifted outward. Soldiers watched from opposite sides, human armor catching light on one end, demon silhouettes holding still in shadow on the other. Neither group approached yet, but neither looked away. Orders moved quietly. A human officer spoke in low tones to a waiting messenger. Across the way, a demon commander did the same. Both gestures ended the same way, with a nod toward the trio. The human envoy arrived first. He stopped at a respectful distance and bowed stiffly, posture formal. He spoke of protection, of official recognition, of order, words chosen carefully and delivered without warmth. Moments later, the demon envoy approached. His tone was colder toward Gorg. It's your last chance to redeem, his phrasing sharper, but the offer matched the first in intent. Support was promised. Expectations were implied. The shadow at his back felt heavier than the words themselves. Grog listened without interrupting. As the offers lingered in the air, his eyes hardened. The familiar weight of battle pressed against restraint, held in check by effort rather than calm. Ilara stepped forward and answered for them. Her refusal was clear and measured. They would not serve one side over another. The words were polite, but the boundary they set was firm. Kaito added a final line, spoken quietly and without emphasis. Neutrality, he said, was not negotiable. The envoys withdrew, each retreating to their own side of the street. Their expressions gave nothing away. As they left, the space around the trio felt tighter, eyes lingering longer, voices lowering as the crowd absorbed what had just been refused. The monks stepped forward openly, taking position beside the trio. Orange robes and prayer beads formed a visible line between the adventurers and the crowd. They did not raise voices or weapons. Their presence alone signaled protection, calm, and refusal to escalate. Tenzu addressed the gathered people, his voice steady and clear. He spoke of the trio not as soldiers or tools, but as bridges, meant to hold weight from both sides without becoming weapons themselves. The crowd reacted unevenly. Some faces softened, drawn by the monk's words. Others stiffened, fear and doubt settling in. A few turned away in anger, unwilling to accept restraint where they wanted certainty. Not far from the gathering, a demon elite patrol blocked one of the city's bridges. Their armor gleamed darkly as they took position, forming a deliberate barrier across the crossing. The intent was unmistakable. One of the demon elites stepped forward and raised his voice. He accused Grog openly, of betrayal, of abandoning demon command, of choosing humans over his own kind. The words were meant to provoke as much as condemn. Grog's hands curled into fists at his sides. His breathing slowed, controlled, as the accusation landed. His eyes fixed on the speaker, shadow deepening across his face as the weight of old battles pressed forward. Ilara shifted slightly, watching Grog rather than the accuser. Her staff remained lowered, her magic held in check, ready but restrained, waiting to see which path he would choose. When the demon elite advanced, Grog moved. The exchange was fast and decisive. Armor struck, ground cracked, and force met force. Grog ended the fight in moments, overwhelming his opponent without excess, without hesitation. The demon elite lay on the stone, stunned and alive. Shock and confusion crossed his face. Grog stepped back and lowered his hands. He did not deliver a finishing blow. The demon struggled to understand how quickly the confrontation had ended, and why he still lived. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, settling over the bridge as both sides watched what restraint looked like in practice. The crowd reacted all at once. Some shouted in anger, voices sharp with frustration at mercy toward demon. Others stood silent, surprised at his restraint, watching Grog with open disbelief. Awe and outrage spread side by side, dividing the onlookers as clearly as any wall. From the edge of the gathering, a human informer watched closely. His eyes lingered on the fallen demon elite, then on Grog. The absence of cruelty unsettled him more than violence would have. Elsewhere, Ren read a fresh set of reports under cool lamplight. Each account described the same thing: victory without execution. His brow tightened as he read on, fingers pausing against the page for the first time, clearly unhappy. In the demon throne room, the demon king listened in silence as the report was delivered. The words were spoken carefully, describing how Grog had spared a loyal elite instead of killing him. Firelight flickered across stone and armor as the message ended. For a moment, the demon king said nothing. His expression shifted subtly, control holding firm even as grief and doubt pressed beneath the surface, neither fully hidden nor allowed to speak. At his side, Commander Korvok clenched his jaw. The failed humiliation burned openly in his eyes, anger sharpened by the fact that restraint had undone the moment he wanted exploited. Across the city, leaflets were scattered through busy streets by some unknown group. They blamed neutral forces for rising instability, accusing unnamed protectors of fueling chaos. People stepped over them, picked them up, argued, and passed them along, the message spreading faster than its source. Kaido paused over one of the leaflets. He scanned the lines carefully, then frowned at the dates printed near the bottom. Some dates didn't match the timing of the current information. Rumors seemed to be spreading deliberately. Without comment, Kaito folded the paper and held it to a nearby flame. The ink warped and bled as the leaflet burned, the accusations curling into ash in his fingers. Nearby, Ilara listened as monks spoke in low voices. They described troop movements that didn't line up with reported clashes, units shifting where no fighting had occurred. Ilara nodded once, concern settling as suspicious patterns began to form.